Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Fox with RealMarcFoxx, and this is your home for rational, reasonable, real gamers.
What the hell have we become?
Let's talk about Unreal Engine 5. Now, there are some amazing looking games in Unreal Engine 5, especially some of the tech demos. When we first saw Unreal Engine 5, I think we all share the same thing in common. We were blown away by these visuals. UE5 or Unreal Engine 5 has the capacity to create what some people call photorealistic visuals. Now, in my case, I like to refer to them as semi-photorealistic graphics because they don't quite look real, but at a glance, you might confuse some of the things in Unreal Engine 5 for the real deal. You might see an Unreal Engine 5 tree and think it's a real tree, but as a general rule, if you're seeing the full game in action, it probably doesn't look like an actual video or movie. Now, the thing about Unreal Engine 5 is you can create some absolutely stellar, incredible, amazing looking graphics, but there's a catch. If you don't properly optimize, the game engine doesn't run very well. This is something we're finding out more and more. As more developers abandon their own game engines and abandon other game engines, similar ones like Unity, Creation Engine, Frost Engine, Crytek Engine, whatever have you, more and more developers move towards Unreal Engine 5, and Unreal Engine 5 requires a bit more effort to get better frame rates out of it. To get better performance, they have to put in the time and the work to properly optimize their games. However, there's another catch to that. Many developers, instead of doing just that, are, particularly for PC versions of games, relying on AI technologies, essentially handicaps or ways to cheat around optimizations. Yes, I'm talking about the somewhat dreaded, controversial DLSS and multi-frame generation. DLSS is essentially AI-powered upscaling, where you run the game at a lower resolution, and the DLSS algorithm by NVIDIA upscales it. AMD's version is known as FSR, and they just came out with FSR 4.0, which is looking so much better than 3, but 3 really wasn't that great to begin with. Most people agree that DLSS has FSRB in almost every way. Whether you're looking at performance or visuals, DLSS seems to be the king, so NVIDIA graphics cards are reigning supreme in terms of total usage by gamers, and there's a reason for that. They just, at the time, seem to be better, even if they are way overpriced. The other technology involved is frame generation, and the problem there is that when the graphics card generates additional frames separate from the game engine, those frames are essentially fake frames, and that they aren't coming from the game's engine itself, but from your graphics cards inserted between the game engine frames. What that means is that if you run at a lower frame rate, you might see 120 FPS with your multi-frame generation times 4, but in actuality, you're running the game at 30 FPS in-game engine frame rate. So you're gonna feel 30 FPS of responsiveness while seeing 120 FPS of smoothness visually. That's a problem. You want to hit at least 60 frames per second in the game engine before you start adding frame generation to anything. If you're not at 60 FPS, action games aren't going to feel as smooth as they should. And one of the other issues with frame generation is it introduces a lot of artifacts. There are errors. You can see like fingers get kind of cut or blurred, or things kind of don't line up properly. There's smearing. As a character is running and the head's moving, the background behind the head, like for example, as I move here, the thumbs up from the Atom Boy or whatever his name is, the Fallout Boy right there, might actually look wrong, and Fallout Boy's a band, isn't it? But as the head moves, if there's something precise behind it, you'll see this smearing, sometimes referred to as sizzling or boiling. It's almost as if the graphics are boiling, like a pot of water with the bubbles, and it's just, you see these kind of sizzles of pixels. That's an issue as well. So these technologies are not perfect. They're actually really good for budget GPUs. They're really good for handhelds where you can't pack enough punch in that small form factor to generate enough frames to have 60 FPS in all the more popular graphically intensive games out there. So having FSR, AMD's version of upscaling in the Steam Deck is great for a handheld, and on a much smaller screen, you don't notice the artifacts as much. But the problem with relying on these technologies is that they not only don't fix the core issue of unoptimized games, but they bring down the experience by introducing artifacts, smearing, blurriness, poor anti-aliasing where you see blurriness where there should be none, and to fix the jaggies and all that. There are so many technologies that we can use nowadays, and more so than just FSR and DLSS and multi-frame generation. There are other things that they're using as well to try to get around what ultimately developers should not be trying to dodge, and that is properly optimizing their games. Unreal Engine 5 can create some of the most amazing semi-photorealistic visuals in games you have ever seen. We are seeing some of the best looking games ever in history coming from this engine, but they often don't perform very well. And even when they do, there's another huge issue. Because of the kind of preset modes, because of the tools that come with Unreal Engine 5, because of the ray tracing setups that come with Unreal Engine 5, what we're finding is that developers are relying on what's already there rather than creating something new. And that means that as you play more and more UE5 games, you'll start to notice that Unreal Engine 5 has a certain look to it. It has a certain kind of a sheen to it. The lighting starts to all look the same, and the way the skin looks on the characters starts to all look the same, and suddenly you're playing a game from one developer, then you look at a game from a totally different developer and a totally different franchise, and you're thinking, wow, these two look pretty similar. In fact, they almost look like they were made by the same company, by the same developer. And the reason for that is because Unreal Engine 5 essentially funnels developers into using these easier preset tools, these tools that come with it, to create experiences that, while look amazing, look very similar. And that's where part of the problem with UE5 comes in. We're getting a lot of very similar looking games that are very poorly optimized. We're quickly finding that the old days where developers would create their own in-house game engines, those are fading away. Even developers that already have their own game engines are quickly abandoning them. Capcom is one of the few developers left that's still holding on to the RE engine or the Resident Evil engine. But many other developers, such as Bethesda with their Creation engine, Cryware, whatever they're called, with, I believe it's called the Crytek engine for Crysis. You've got others like the Frost engine, I believe, was also one. There are lots of game engines you can use. There are some you can basically purchase rights to. That's Unreal Engine 5. There's also Unity. And then the problem with those is the same thing with Unreal Engine 5, is that it comes with a lot of these preset tools that they all end up relying on because it's easier than making their own stuff, and therefore they all start to look the same. You'll even notice that with Unity and newbie indie developers on Steam, they even release games using the same assets because they purchase the same default assets that come with this game engine and then use those because they're royalty free. Another issue with Unreal Engine 5 is that the developers essentially have to pay, not just for the game engine, they have to pay on a per game basis, I believe, or there's like a set amount depending on how many they sell. I'm not 100% sure, but basically they're paying a portion of the proceeds from the game, the sales, to the developers of Unreal Engine 5. idTech, I believe, is the name of the company. So what they're doing is taking a loss to use a pre-existing game engine, to use pre-existing tools, not optimizing them, and creating games that look like many other games that are also coming out. And the more samey games look and feel, the less exciting they feel to play. Because when you play a new game and a different franchise from a different developer, what you want is a different experience, a different feel, a different look. We don't want all of our games to look the same. If every game looked like Call of Duty, that wouldn't be very exciting. We'd get real sick of it real fast. Do you remember back in the day when everyone complained about every game having the muddy kind of browns, dark browns and greens and grays? And that wasn't a very exciting time. But at that time, that's what they thought was photorealistic. That's what they did. Nowadays, we do occasionally see games come out that look incredible, amazing, and different from other games, but we're noticing more and more the same looking games are coming out from different developers and different franchises with different characters, but the skin tones, the hairstyling, the lighting, that dreadful ray tracing, which I think is almost a scam at this point, because when you turn on ray tracing on the computer, your frame rate just goes... It just takes a nosedive. If you turn up ray tracing to max, you're struggling on some of the most powerful hardware available just to hit 60 FPS. That's why NVIDIA comes out with DLSS and multi-frame generation. You crank the resolution down by turning on DLSS, it AI upscales it, and then you use AI to generate fake frames that don't actually improve the feel of the experience. If you've ever played the original Dark Souls on the consoles, or the first Dark Souls without any mods on PC, and then compare that to Dark Souls Remastered, you'll see the difference 60 FPS makes. It's a huge difference, 60 versus 30. 60, in my opinion, should be a default, standard, bare minimum frame rate for an action game. But nowadays, if you turn on that multi-frame generation to try to hit 120, you may be looking at a 30 FPS in-game engine frame rate, with an additional 3 frames plugged in between each frame, meaning it feels like 30 while looking like 120. And that's gotta be very odd. I have tried out multi-frame generation. I'm not a huge fan at all. I prefer real frames from the game engine, but this is where we come back to Unreal Engine 5. UE5, for the most part, when you have modern high fidelity graphics in these AA or AAA games, it cannot keep up with the hardware that's out there right now without these little tricks and techniques, unless the developers put in that hardcore effort to heavily optimize their games, and they are not. Not only that, but they're not even trying to compress the textures as much as they used to. They're not separating the 4K or 8K resolution texture packs. We're finding games releasing that are 90, 150, 192, 200 gigabytes for one game. And if you don't play beyond 1080p, why do you have 1440p and 4K textures installed on your computer? I remember when they used to release a game and the 4K texture pack would be separate, so you could download those additional gigabytes of data if you could use it. I don't have a 4K monitor or TV in my house. I don't need anything to be in 4K. 1440p is my sweet spot for gaming on my 4080 Super, which you can see the box for right there. That's good enough for me. And I want to have a solid 60 or beyond. You know what's not terribly important to me? Super realistic, photorealistic graphics. I don't need super high fidelity, high quality graphics. What I need is a really solid frame rate. It'd be nice to get both, but if it comes down to it, I'd rather have a higher frame rate than higher fidelity or higher quality in the graphics. That's why I'll go in there, and if I'm not hitting solid 60 the whole time, I'll start bringing those settings down. I'll bring shadows down. I always turn off ray tracing, because this whole Unreal Engine 5, NVIDIA pushing ray tracing, the systems we have out there right now just cannot handle it. I remember when Elden Ring implemented ray tracing, and I had the second most powerful graphics card on the market, and a powerful CPU, and 32 gigabytes of RAM, and all that good stuff running on an NVMe SSD, which is that little like chip looking thing you slot into the motherboard, very fast one. And when I turned on ray tracing, I could barely keep 60 FPS in the open world. Who is this ray tracing designed for when the most powerful graphics cards available to the consumer market can't even run them at high settings at 60 FPS? Why even have it? They name their entire graphics card generation after generation. They change it from GTX to RTX for ray tracing. And it's something that a lot of us just turn off. And even if it can run the ray tracing okay, it just makes everything shiny and reflective, almost too reflective, where you're seeing reflections of everything in everything. I don't want everything to be super shiny all the time. I don't want to see the sky and everything I'm looking at and every single puddle on the ground. I want the graphics to look good, be optimized, run well, and while we can't have all of those, the most important thing is optimize it to run well and look good enough. I don't know any gamers out there insisting that we need better graphics at the expense of performance. Do you? I've never, ever heard anyone say that. I've never heard anyone say, yeah, I would love the frame rate to tank as long as the graphics look amazing. Everyone complains when the frame rate drops. Everyone complains when it doesn't hold up visually because you're getting these dips and the frame timings are off. Even if the game looks amazing, we need good performance. And UE5 requires a lot more from developers to achieve that. And this is why a lot of games that are coming out nowadays are so poorly optimized. That, and we get some games even telling you have to have ray tracing. What? Some people still have graphics cards that don't support ray tracing. Now, yes, I get it. You want to tell these poor people to just get up and buy a new graphics card, get in line, come on people. You know, this isn't 2015, but again, not everyone can afford the latest and greatest. Some people hold on to their graphics cards for as long as they can. And requiring these new technologies that I'd rather just turn off seems ridiculous. We've got developers releasing Unreal Engine 5 games telling PC players, use DLSS, upscale, basically telling you, run the game at a lower resolution and just AI upscale it because you can't run it at the full resolution you want to because we didn't optimize our game. This is a problem. This is a major issue. And while many people are blaming Unreal Engine 5 for this, there is some blame to be borne there. Much of the blame also belongs on the developers and the publishers that pressure their developers to kick out these releases without proper time to optimize. Optimization often gets left to the end, and the way it normally works, as described by many programmers and developers that I've interacted with and read about, is that they start with the optimizations that give the most performance. So you can get maybe a 15% increase, you want to focus on that one. But if there's something that'll give like a 2% increase, well, that's not as big as the 15. So focus on that 15% increase first. And there are many ways to do this. We're not going to get into the weeds on that, but developers absolutely must start optimizing their games better. Stop relying on these cheap tricks in Unreal Engine 5 and optimize the games for us so that they play well and they look good enough. If you have to scale back a little bit of the visual experience, that's fine. Advertise your game as being well optimized, plays well at a good frame rate. When's the last time you heard that from a developer? I mean, they like to say 60 FPS, but it's not necessarily locked the whole time, it dips. I would love for them to say you're going to get a solid 60 out of this on the consoles, and then you can get as high as you want to go on the PC based on your hardware. No, we're just getting them showing visuals and showing cinematic trailers, and I'm so tired of cinematic trailers. I'm so tired of zero gameplay, cinematic CGI cutscene trailers. Show us solid gameplay. You can turn off the HUD to make it look more cinematic. It's not a movie, guys, it's a video game, but show us the actual gameplay in action at the highest resolution and the highest frame rate that we're gonna see, and let us actually see what we'll get when we buy the game. Unreal Engine 5 is a major problem as long as it keeps being utilized in a way that is inefficient, lazy, and in some ways boring. Because the more same these games look, the more samey they look, the less exciting the games are. We want all of our games to look and feel a bit different, and using the same kinds of lighting and the same little techniques for these textures and the same skin tones and using all these same devices that come pre-included with the game engine isn't the way to go. I know it's the cheap way, it's the easy way, it's the fast way, but over time we're finding Unreal Engine 5 games are starting to all look the same. You can almost look at a trailer and go, oh yeah, it's another Unreal Engine 5 game. It's got that certain UE5 kind of sheen to it. Looks amazing, but just looks the same as what we've been seeing for years now. Unreal Engine has been great for a long time. Unreal Engine 5 has got to be probably the first iteration in a long time where I've heard massive complaints about it. There are other engines out there, and at this point, I'm not sure we're going to see a lot of developers creating their own in-house engines anymore because of the amount of effort it takes, but it would be really nice to see a AA, AAA level engine that we can use for modern games with high fidelity graphics come from somewhere else other than id Tech when it comes to Unreal Engine 5. I would like a competitor, something that at least looks and feels different. So at least we have two different samey looking game engines, right? It's sad to me that Bethesda might be abandoning their own creation engine. I wish they would create an updated version of it and continue to use that, because when you create your own in-game engine, in-house engine, you have the capacity to include what you need. You don't have to include anything you don't need. You can optimize it specifically for the kind of games you're going to make, and you can build in custom mod support from the ground up. You can mod Unreal Engine 5 games. It's just not as easy as it is with the creation engine that literally came with tools from the developer where people could make their own levels and enemies. You could make your own armor. You could make your own quests, entire areas of the game when it came to like Oblivion and Skyrim. There's just no competing with that when you have these sort of outside mods, you know, injection DLLs, things like Reshade or Special K, tools that act outside of the game engine. I want to see more new game engines that incorporate modding and that incorporate exactly what the developer needs. However, given the cost of creating your own in-house engine and given the cost of game development nowadays, at this point, I think as gamers, we're lucky a lot of these developers are just still in business at all, much less, you know, publishing halfway decent games. So to ask them to take the time to make their own in-house game engine is probably asking too much right now, especially in this video game economy. But what do you guys think about Unreal Engine 5? Can you spot an Unreal Engine 5 game from a mile away? And do you feel like a lot of these UE5 games just have the samey look and feel as all the others? Let me know in the comment section below. Make sure to like the video, subscribe, join the channel if you want. And as always, of course, I have a link to my book, my novel, New Tokyo, Cyberpunk Light Sci-Fi, linked in the description. So go down there, click it, and give it a read. There's a free sample on Amazon. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you next time.